Now we have the New World Translation. What a blessing that has proved to be. It's so clear.
This is Jehovah's Witness beliefs. One day when judgment comes, your survival is going to depend on following the instructions of these 8 guys.
For decades, millions of Jehovah's Witnesses have been told that the New World Translation is the most accurate Bible translation available. But what if some of its most important verses contain words that were never there? Not mistranslations, not spelling mistakes, words added, phrases changed, meanings shifted. And the strangest part, the changes seem to point in the same direction every single time. At first, it looks like coincidence. Then it happens again, and again, and again, until one question becomes impossible to ignore. Is the New World Translation translating doctrine from the Bible or translating doctrine into the Bible? Because when we follow the evidence, we uncover a pattern that leads to one verse almost nobody talks about, a verse that could change the entire conversation. To understand the controversy surrounding the New World Translation, we first need to understand the reason it was created. Jehovah's Witnesses have long argued that many mainstream Bible translations were influenced by what they call Christendom's traditions. According to Watchtower publications, translators often brought their own beliefs into the text, allowing doctrines such as the Trinity, the immortal soul, and eternal torment to influence translation decisions. From their perspective, the solution was simple. Create a translation that removes those biases and restores what the Bible originally said. On the surface, that sounds reasonable. After all, every serious Bible student wants accuracy. Every believer wants the truth. But this is where an important question appears. What happens when translators begin the project already convinced that certain doctrines are false? What happens when they already know what conclusions they expect the text to support? Think about it for a moment. If a translator believes Jesus cannot be God, how might that affect difficult verses about Jesus? If a translator believes the Holy Spirit is not a person, how might that affect verses describing the Holy Spirit? Even unintentionally, beliefs can influence translation choices. This is not a problem unique to Jehovah's Witnesses. It is a challenge faced by every translator. But critics argue that the New World Translation goes beyond interpretation. They claim it consistently changes wording in ways that support Watchtower theology. Of course, one example could be dismissed as a mistake. 2 examples could be coincidence. But what if the same pattern appears over and over again? Because the first example isn't found in a controversial verse about Jesus. It's found in something much more basic. A phrase that seems harmless at first glance. A phrase involving the Holy Spirit. And once you notice it, the investigation truly begins. Every investigation starts with a small clue. In this case, the clue is surprisingly simple: the Holy Spirit. Jehovah's Witnesses teach that the Holy Spirit is not a person. Instead, they describe it as God's active force, a kind of divine power that God uses to accomplish His will. Whether that belief is correct is not the focus of this investigation. The question is something else. Should a translation reflect a doctrine, or should it simply translate the text and let readers decide? That question becomes important when we examine how the New World Translation handles certain references to the Holy Spirit. Watchtower publications have explained that some traditional Bible translations can give readers the impression that the Holy Spirit is a person. Because of that, translators in some languages have chosen expressions such as holy force or holy power to make the meaning clearer. At first glance, that may seem helpful. But notice what just happened. The translation is no longer simply translating words. It is explaining what those words are believed to mean. And that distinction matters. Imagine if another religious group translated every reference to God using words that automatically supported its own doctrines. Would readers still be encountering the original text, or would they be encountering someone's interpretation of the text? Maybe this is just an isolated example. Maybe the translators were simply trying to make the meaning easier to understand. That's possible. But then another example appears. This time, it isn't about the Holy Spirit. It isn't about a difficult phrase. It involves a single word that appears 4 separate times in one passage. A word that changes who created everything. And according to critics, that word was never in the original Greek text at all. If the Holy Spirit example raised questions, the next example raises something much bigger. It takes us to Colossians chapter 1. This passage is one of the strongest descriptions of Jesus in the entire New Testament. Most Bible translations read something like this: "Through him all things were created. All things were created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together." The wording is straightforward. All things. But when you open the New World Translation, something changes. Suddenly, the passage reads, "All other things were created through him. All other things were created for him. He is before all other things. By means of him, all other things were made to exist." At first, the addition seems minor. It's only one word, other. But that one word changes the entire meaning of the passage. Without it, Jesus appears to be the creator of all things. With it, Jesus becomes part of creation itself. And that distinction is important because Jehovah's Witnesses teach that Jesus was created by Jehovah before everything else. So naturally, a question emerges. Where did the word other come from? Critics point out that the word does not appear in the Greek text. Even more surprising, it does not appear in the Watchtower's own Kingdom interlinear translation. The Greek is there, the English literal rendering is there, but the word other is not. Years ago, brackets were used to indicate that the word had been added for clarity. Later editions removed brackets entirely. Now, pause and think about that. If a single added word can change who created everything, what happens when the same thing appears in another passage? Because Colossians isn't the only place where other suddenly appears, and the next example may be even harder to explain. By this point, some viewers may be thinking maybe Colossians was just a special case. That's fair. One example doesn't prove a pattern. But then we arrive at Philippians chapter 2. Most Bible translations say that God gave Jesus the name above every name, a powerful statement. But in the New World Translation, the wording changes once again. Instead of saying Jesus received the name above every name, it says he received the name above every other name. There it is again, the same added word, the same theological effect, the same separation between Jesus and Jehovah. Critics argue that the word still does not appear in the Greek text. Supporters argue that it helps clarify the intended meaning. But now we have a question. If other appears in Colossians and other appears in Philippians, are we looking at coincidence, or are we beginning to see a pattern? And then the investigation reaches a verse that almost nobody talks about. A verse that many former Jehovah's Witnesses describe as one of the most revealing translation decisions in the entire New World Translation, Acts 20:28. Most Bible translations render the passage in a way that says God purchased the congregation with his own blood. But the New World Translation says something different. It says the congregation was purchased with the blood of his own Son. That sounds harmless until you discover something surprising. The word son does not appear in the Greek text, not in the manuscript, not in the Kingdom interlinear, not in the verse itself. So why was it added? And more importantly, why does the addition seem to solve a theological problem? Because once Acts 20:28 is placed beside Colossians and Philippians, something starts becoming difficult to ignore. The pattern isn't getting weaker, it's getting stronger. If there's one verse at the center of the debate over the New World Translation, it's John 1:1. For decades, this single verse has sparked arguments between Jehovah's Witnesses, Christians, scholars, and Bible translators. Most Bible translations render the verse like this: "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." But the New World Translation reads differently. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God." Just one letter, the addition of the word a. Yet that single letter changes the meaning dramatically. Supporters of the New World Translation argue that the Greek grammar allows for this reading. Critics argue that the translation is driven more by theology than grammar. Scholars have debated this verse for decades, but for the purpose of this investigation, there is an even more important question. What happens when we step back from John 1:1 entirely? Because by now we've seen the Holy Spirit example, Colossians 1, Philippians 1, Acts 20:28, and now John 1:1. Different verses, different books, different authors, yet critics argue the changes consistently move in the same direction. And then I discovered something far larger than any single verse, something that affects not one passage, not 10 passages, not even 50 passages. It affects hundreds. Because the most controversial translation decision in the entire New World Translation may not be found in Colossians, or Philippians, or Acts. It may be found throughout the New Testament itself. A decision involving the divine name Jehovah. A decision that raises a question scholars are still discussing today. How can a word appear hundreds of times in a translation when it doesn't appear in any known Greek New Testament manuscript? And that is where this investigation takes an unexpected turn. Up to this point, every example we've examined involved a handful of verses, a word added here, a phrase adjusted there. But what if the most significant change in the New World Translation isn't limited to a few passages? What if it appears hundreds of times? This brings us to the divine name Jehovah. Jehovah's Witnesses believe God's personal name should be restored to the Bible. Because of that belief, the New World Translation uses Jehovah throughout the New Testament hundreds of times. The reasoning seems straightforward. If God's name originally appeared in the Bible, shouldn't it be restored? But critics immediately raise a difficult question. Where exactly was it restored from? Because despite thousands of surviving Greek New Testament manuscripts, no known manuscript contains the name Jehovah, not one. Instead, the manuscripts use words that translate as Lord or God. Watchtower publications argue that the divine name likely existed in earlier copies and was later removed. Many scholars disagree, arguing that there is currently no manuscript evidence demonstrating that the name appeared in the original New Testament writings. Notice what makes this different from every previous example. This isn't about one verse. This isn't about one word. This is a translation choice affecting hundreds of passages. And as I continued researching, another surprising discovery appeared. Who actually made these decisions? The translation committee behind the original New World Translation remained anonymous. Millions of Jehovah's Witnesses were asked to trust the translation, yet most readers had no idea who translated it. No names, no credentials attached to the finished work, no public scholarly review process. And suddenly, a new question emerged. If a translation makes controversial choices, shouldn't readers know who made them? Because when we put all the receipts together, the investigation stops being about individual verses. It becomes about something much bigger: authority itself. At the beginning of this investigation, the question seemed simple. Is the New World Translation accurate? But after examining the evidence, that no longer appears to be the real question. Think about what we've seen. The Holy Spirit, Colossians 1. Philippians 2, Acts 20:28, John 1:1. The divine name in the New Testament. Each example can be debated on its own. Supporters have explanations, critics have objections. But investigations are rarely solved by a single piece of evidence. They're solved by patterns. And that's where this becomes difficult to ignore. Because the same thing appears to happen again and again. When a verse could support a traditional Christian understanding, the wording often changes in a way that aligns with Watchtower theology. Maybe one example is coincidence. Maybe two examples are coincidence. But how many examples does it take before coincidence becomes a pattern? And that leads to an uncomfortable question. Imagine another religious group produced a Bible translation. Now imagine that group inserted the word Trinity into several passages where the original text never used it. Would Jehovah's Witnesses trust that translation? Probably not. Most people wouldn't. So should the standard be different when the additions support beliefs we already agree with? Or should every translation face the same test? Because ultimately, this is no longer a translation issue. It's a trust issue. And trust leads directly to authority. Who has the right to tell believers what God said? The original text, the translator, or the organization behind the translator? And perhaps that's the most important question of all. Because if these are the verses everyone talks about, what happens when we start examining the verses almost nobody talks about?